Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Next. I am your host, Mike Walker, and today you're listening to episode 26. And what's cool about this episode is actually a two-parter. So 26 and 27, we're going to talk about the convergence of technologies and how they're making digital ecosystems a reality more than ever. And so to really get into this topic, we've got Ryan Rugg. She's the global industry leader over at R3. They make a popular distributed ledger technology called Corda. And so we're going to talk about all of her experience from a industry and from a business perspective. That's really going to help us understand why digital ecosystems are going to be so vital to our future and how these emerging technologies are going to enable them. Now, as always, all the links and descriptions will be both below here with this episode, but also you can find them on vnextpod.com. And like other episodes, you'll find a detailed write-up around, some of the extended commentary around what we're talking about, but also some good resources as far as links and such that you can go and chase down some more extended information. So, with that, let's go ahead and get into part one of two. Let's get into it.
Thanks, Mike, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. This is a long time coming. You're doing some really, really cool stuff. When did we first meet? It was what, maybe 6 or more months ago?
Yeah, if not longer. Yeah,
Yeah.
working ecosystem, ironically, right? That's looking at kind of converging tech.
Yes. And so, maybe tell us a little bit more about you. I kind of gave the high level, but it's better coming from you.
Yeah, thanks. So my name's Ryan Rugg. I work for R3. I run the industry business unit for them. I started about almost 4 years ago, which is like dog years in blockchain. Where I was brought on to expand the ecosystem past just banks. At that point, R3 was a consortium of 65 plus banks that were testing different blockchain solutions. So they decided to form a consortium. They were spending hundreds, if not millions of dollars on that. So we brought them together into like a sandbox environment to start testing together because we really truly believed in the power of the ecosystem. That sharing the information is where you're going to break down those silos. Um, so back in 2017, I saw a massive opportunity in insurance. Insurance was going through a digital transformation, like several other industries where incumbents were coming in and disrupting their business. Because if you think about insurance, you have Tesla pricing auto insurance, you have Amazon out there looking to get in the insurance business. So they're really eager to see how technology could help enable them and really create ROI as well as new revenue sources. So we opened the Center of Excellence in 2017 with Accord, the standards organization. And from there, worked with several consortiums, Riskstream, B3I, InsureWave in insurance to really help them grow and scale. And then about a year and a half ago, the firm came to me and asked if, I could kind of expand my role and start focusing on several other industries. So we break it down into, mature and emerging and the industries that, we're looking after right now. And we kind of looked at Gartner, Mike near and dear to your heart, like what were the kind of the key industries out there they were focusing on. Also, what were the key industries building on our open source platform? And it came out cap markets, trade and supply, insurance, telco, healthcare, and energy, as well as autos. So those are kind of the key industries we're focused on, and I'm responsible for working with different consortiums and ecosystems as well as individual corporates to showcase how blockchain can be instrumental in helping them scale their business as they're going through a digital transformation.
That is really, really cool. And it's a lot, right? I mean, crossing all those different industries that have different motivations, different drivers, that can be somewhat challenging to kind of get ramped up and figure all that stuff out. Now, I spent some time in the banking and insurance space as well. Before we had this whole construct of digital ecosystems, but the banking and insurance world, they're not. It's not foreign for them to understand the notion of a more of an analog ecosystem. And so, whether it be, the invention of the ATM network back in the 70s or correspondent banking, all these key constructs that have been built have led to some of the digital constructs that we have with software as a service, ecosystems, etc. And I guess from your experience, what have you seen that is different from these analog ecosystems to these digital ecosystems? Is it fundamentally the technology? It's not mainframes over, SNA L2 connections, or is it something more than that?
Yeah, I think, it really has to do with, if I think of like banking in particular, the reason that I don't think, looking back to, R3's kind of foundation and working with the banks at the beginning, I don't think it's necessarily because they wanted to. I think it's because they had to, right? It's like if you look
Right.
at post crisis, their ability to kind of, you know, drive revenue became spreads became more and more compressed and it became more difficult. So how can you make more money? You cut down on operations, right? You lower your expense ratio. And that's really what these distributed networks allow, right? Siloed information that, each individual party needs the same record and you have multiple people checking and if it's Excel spreadsheets or sometimes in insurance is archaic as email and faxes are still going back and forth to verify claims. And it's a lot of people in these call centers and a lot of people that it needs to touch these. It's like, how can you accelerate the digital transformation? And that's what, DLT has helped enable these people to cut down and ultimately also enhances their customer experiences. Customers are receiving, payment faster on a more real-time basis. If they're getting better customer service, it's just enhancing their kind of overall experience. And I think that's what, initially brought, these kind of different consortiums, ecosystems together was to lower expense ratio. But we've started to see that like pivot, which ties into like this podcast, like the convergent technology. It's like now once you have all the data kind of organized in a secure fashion, an immutable record, what other technology can you add to that with AI, telematics, IoT that can create potentially new revenue lines? So it's, lowering your expense ratios, kind of phase one of what we've seen several of these parties going through. But it's really how do they grow their potential revenue lines? And that's what, once you kind of have synchronized data in a secure way, it's really what it allows. And in this ecosystem, if you think about how much data there is out there now, if you're in healthcare and wearables and collecting the data and putting it in a very organized fashion, and also seeing the convergence of our industries. I look after a certain amount of industries, but everyone says like they're converging. We have some large telcos that want to run the networks for these insurers. We have some, banks that want to do the payment aspect of it, and the central bank digital currencies are coming in kind of across all of them. So it's really fascinating for me to kind of be at the forefront of this, seeing like the early adopters going live, but really kind of bringing the rest of the ecosystem with it.
Yeah, totally. And I think the point that you made around what I lovingly refer to as Franken Industries is that there is kind of this phenomenon happening where these industries are morphing and blurring the lines with other industries, but also they're being assembled almost like Lego bricks. I mean, if you look at the startup world, we see a very similar phenomenon that traditional lines between industries are completely being blurred. And I think that's another key thing that this whole digital ecosystem concept really starts to tease out is, hey, everything is connected to everything else. And it doesn't matter if you're in this industry or that industry, or what's the definition of a customer. Well, a customer is everybody. Your internal employees, your external direct customers, customers you didn't even know about. And so it really breaks down a lot of these traditional paradigms. Now, before we jump in too far into digital ecosystems, what I like to ask most people when they come on the podcast is to tell us something interesting about yourself that people may not know about you, whether professionally or personally. Doesn't matter, but something interesting about you.
Yeah, it always kind of shock people when I tell them I'm a coal mine's daughter from Knoxville, Tennessee. They don't typically, that ended up on Wall Street and became, now post recovering banker in tech. But actually, the path kind of makes sense. As a computer science finance major, when it wasn't cool to be in a computer science major, I was doing C++ and Java when my friends were out in communications and kind of other things. But I really had a passion for it. And I'll admit my first job, I walked in all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed thinking I was going to completely reinvent the stack of technology at, an older bank and, quickly realized I was doing VLOOKUPs and, some basic programming and I was like, and I worked my way to the front office from there. That's when I kind of made the jump to understand the business pain points, which so I kind of understand both sides of it, like the technology and really how it can be enabled to start scaling, and then also like the business use cases, which I think is a pretty unique kind of blend for someone in my seat.
Yeah, totally. And very similar with myself in the financial services realm. In banking, when I first started my career, it was similar. However, I didn't go down the specific line of business you went down. I went more of the consumer lending path. And so, looking at loan origination systems and, how to convert those from these archaic mainframe technologies or maybe even Unix based technologies to modern web apps. And, modern back then isn't very modern right now. But that being said, we were doing some cool stuff, getting off COBOL copybooks and all that good stuff. Um, so yeah, that's very cool, and love to hear interesting stories like that. You're right. I definitely didn't expect that you were a coal miner's daughter, but very cool. Um, so with digital ecosystems, and I think that this requires, there's a whole lot to unpack here, and I think we're going to naturally do that. But at kind of the basic level, when I look at in the simplest form, what are these things? Digital ecosystems are no different than traditional business ecosystems. It's about bringing organizations together. So what is different? What is different is that the technology is enabling us. We now have communications technology where we're not restricted to lease lines between mainframes. We've got cellular technology that is fast enough, robust enough that we can connect anywhere, anytime. And so what that's doing is it's really fostering these endless connections that can happen between people, devices, organizations, etc. And with that endless connection, now that's opening up new opportunities that we didn't have before when it was this point to point type of integration between these ecosystems. Now we can orchestrate these new patterns with people that we didn't have before, and they can be rich, they can be dynamic, and also with technologies that we'll talk about with AI, they can be self-organizing. And you know we're going to see more and more these technologies are going to do more on our behalf, where we delegate tasks to them that will participate in an ecosystem. A great example is maybe I have a sensor on my milk in my refrigerator, and when it gets down to a certain level, it will automatically reach into the Amazon ecosystem and order that milk for me and have it delivered when I need it. So another aspect of this is a lot of these digital ecosystems are here today in their infancy. And so some of the projects that you had mentioned, Ryan, but also some of the ones that many folks may not really realize is you've got Airbnb, Uber, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple. They've all got flavors of these digital ecosystems. And while they're not using right now some of the technologies that we're talking about, because we're talking about what's coming next or what is emerging. But this concept of a digital ecosystem is already here. Now it's a matter of building on that. And so, from your perspective, I kind of gave kind of my version of kind of that salient description. Do you look at this the same way, similar way, a different way? What are your thoughts?
I think like the big difference between the traditional like digital economies versus now is the security, right? Being able to cryptographically hash this data and share it with like what's normally distrusted parties. So if you think of like insurance and insurers, reinsurers, and brokers, they all need relatively same copies of the policies, but yet they all store their own copy of it in their own database, have their own maintenance on it, where this technology allows for them to instantly kind of via smart contracts share these kind of information in a cryptographic hashed way, and then also update it, right? Well, I think also like smart contracts automatically triggering to like pay out a claim, so there has to be no interaction. So I think it creates trust within a trustless kind of economy, which is quite different than prior ecosystems that I've seen. And I expect to kind of to see this continue to evolve. I think the security is really what one of the characteristics that people find so valuable in these distributed ledgers.
Totally agree, and I think that's again Um, when we talk about the convergence of these technologies, that's another set of key technologies that is really enabling this. And when I look at these digital ecosystems, I look at the importance of the rise of privacy. And yes, we've got more data than we've ever had in the history of humanity, but what should we do with this data? What is ethically responsible to do, things to do with this data? And so, we've got additional questions that we need to figure out as a result of this, because we haven't had this opportunity before. And so that's where some of these security technologies are going to come in to help us understand how to utilize those technologies, protect people. So oftentimes I'll talk a lot about sovereignty of data, and that's not from a country perspective, but that's maybe from a person, from a GDPR perspective, or maybe that's an organization, or maybe it is a law. If I'm in, I've got data in Germany and I can't leave the border. Well, I need technology that's going to be able to help me do that in a straightforward and easy way. And so I think that, whether it be sovereignty of data, whether it be collaboration of data in a secure way, those are going to be really, really critical points to really accelerate the adoption.
No, and I agree. And like, not to be cliche, but like data is the new oil, right? I mean, we're seeing more need than ever for better, faster access, more security, more visibility. If you think of like supply chain across the whole entire, process. So I think, blockchain DLT systems could emerge potentially as one of like the safe storage and for sharing this information in a decentralized, distributed way that gives real time benefits for the end users, helping through this transformation as we're in these uncertain times.
No, absolutely. And now we've mentioned blockchain quite a bit. Um, in your mind, can you be a digital ecosystem without blockchain?
That's a great question. And for security and privacy standpoints, I think it would be extremely difficult. You know, you, unless you're sharing data centers and centralized databases with distrusted parties where they can see all of your information, which I don't see that possible now. Who knows with enhancements to technology, and we're also working on products like Conclave that allows for SGX to kind of do these multi-factor authentication. But currently as it stands from a security and privacy standpoint, no. But I would love to get kind of your thoughts on that, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this, no different than I would look at most other things, in that um, I would say yes, you can. However, what I agree with what you said was it will be a lot of work. The analogy when I talk about blockchain, I talk about, can SQL Server do the same thing blockchain can do? Well, sure, you can spend a whole lot of time, code a whole lot of things, and spend a whole lot of money and man hours building something to do something that replicates that functionality. But is it really worth incurring all that technical debt to get there? Likewise with our Excel spreadsheets. A lot of the Excel spreadsheets that we grew up with in the financial services space got the job done. Was it the most effective tool? Absolutely not. Was it the most secure tool? Absolutely not. Um, and so I think it's a question of essentially using what I steal from the '80s, the Mr. Miyagi method. Work smarter, not harder. Use the technologies that will complement what you're trying to accomplish. There will still be a role for these other technologies within your solution, but make sure that if you do have a solution where you build an ecosystem that is across multiple company boundaries, where you can't control the data, then blockchain is something you should probably use. If this is a private ecosystem that's maybe something to optimize with your company and a small set of partners, and you've got legal agreements in place, if they do bad things, you can go and sue them, well, then maybe you can get away with not having blockchain. Maybe you could do something that's maybe one step removed and use, Amazon's got a product where, it's not a blockchain, it's essentially a database that's trying to be a blockchain. But maybe you can use something that's lighter weight to, to facilitate that type of interaction. And so I think it really depends on the business problem that you're solving. What do you think about that, Ryan?
No, and I agree. But the interesting thing, just to play kind of devil's advocate, is I've been recently seeing where kind of the early adopters, pioneers, were all consortium driven, all different ecosystems. But we now have worked with an individual bank that's creating a digital coin within their own network because they have so many subsidiaries in like different countries, and to settle it, it has to go back to Swift, and they have to pay a fee and take so long, albeit it's an internal app versus creating a digital coin for the bank. So it's interesting for like, and I'm also seeing one in insurance where some of their, clients who are multinational and different entities and work with different, subsidies of the insurer are developing their own networks internally. So I would say at the beginning it was all like large ecosystems, but I'm now seeing some use cases kind of evolve within the ecosystem of large corporates, which is pretty fascinating to me. Because you would think, to your point, they could use a centralized database.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's there's lots of different value drivers that organizations are going to have to figure out, and some of those drivers are going to be non-technical. They're going to be intangibles. It's going to be more strategic drivers. So maybe it's a case of, listen, we got the answer for where the market needs to go. However, to get every organization together, get their lawyers in the room, get their business executives in the room, and get everyone to agree. So, challenge number one: organize everyone's calendars to be in one place at the same time. As you and I both know, that's very difficult and very time consuming. Two, you got to get them to open up and be able to share their strategy on how they feel about that marketplace, which is a whole nother set of challenges, right? Because a lot of people like to hug that strategy like a big old teddy bear. They don't want to. They don't want to share.
I
Is
think
kind of the native instinct, right? And then third, they've all got to agree. And throughout this whole process, it's just extremely time consuming and frustrating. And we've both been through those processes. But like you said, if you start there, you can get and you can if you can get that participation and you're willing to go through that process, then good things are going to happen. Now, on the scenario that I'm kind of referring to here is, let's say you're like, look, I understand that that's going to be the situation. I kind of know what the answer is in the marketplace, and I just want to say, look, I'm going to create something small and incubate it in the marketplace and get people excited about it. And so a common pattern that I'm seeing is taking more of this more centralized approach and essentially coloring it as, a blockchain like thing, a digital ecosystem like thing, and saying, look, we're just trying to create an MVP of what we think will resonate in the marketplace. And you guys are way too slow trying to agree on things. We're going to show you how it's done. And then once we have a template of what good looks like, then that's a gravitational force to bring people in. And so that's a common pattern that I'm starting to see in the marketplace as well. Is there's ones that are starting on the extreme end of massive collaboration, trying to get these things off the ground, which requires a lot of legal work and all that great stuff. And then there's this more opportunistic path that's leading to the same destination. However, they're starting in more scrappy ways.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I like how you use words crafty because I agree. It's like, let's just do this, build it, get it out in the market, and then like showcase what the technology can do, and then we'll scale from there. So no, I definitely agree.
Well, it's like, I worked for this bank, and you could look at my LinkedIn, so I can just go ahead and say it. Um, uh, Fifth Third Bank, and they were one of the pioneers behind the ATM, and they invented the Genie network. And back in the '70s, I had the fortune of working with the CIO who was one of the inventors of the ATM, and he was telling me stories about kind of their scrappy methods to get that ecosystem going, and how he's in the back of a cabinet feeding dollar bills outside to simulate it working. But the concepts are translate just as well then as it does now. Is that you've got to start somewhere, and humans are analog living in a digital world. Sometimes they need to see it before they can believe it.
No, I agree. And I think that post this pandemic, we're going to see that spike in digital transformation, like you've kind of seen after like the Spanish flu and other pandemics that like, once you go through and realize that you can't do businesses as usual and like things are truly disrupted and that you need new digital systems. If you think of, supply chains. Typically, you're either a buyer or a seller of, like, let's say, ventilators. Well, where now hospitals became both. Like, their current infrastructure, their current systems are not set up to do that. So, right now, while a lot of our clients are kind of focused on making sure that operations are up and running and that making sure that, cash flows, that they're solvent, all that, I truly believe, like, after this pandemic, you're going to see a spike in digital transformation just because, as you said, they're feeding money through the back wall to get things done, and they got it done, but it's not the most effective way, and that they're going to need kind of new infrastructure to replace in the event, you kind of ever have another crisis like this.
No, I totally agree. And what I flashed up on the screen that you can't see, but others can see right now, is kind of a model that I've used in the past that articulates exactly what you just said. So I agree. It's the shift from this two-sided linear platform where we've got the notion of Porter's supply chain where it's very sequential. um,
Mhm.
that's going to break down in a big way. And I think you're absolutely right. The pandemic, at least the clients that I've talked to, and I've talked to somewhere around 80ish clients here
Mhm.
over the past 3 months, and they're all saying the same thing. They have to accelerate their digital transformation efforts, whether that's to help support the virtual work environment and all the downstream line of business apps that are affected by that need to become much more digital, less brittle, more dynamic, more cost effective, or it's tapping into the gig economy and really leveraging that as a key resource. I think with all the massive furloughs and layoffs, that I think a lot of these folks are going to come back not as permanent employees, but I think a good percentage is going to come back as gig workers. That's just my personal prediction. um, but also, I think what this has also highlighted is this more on-demand economy. And we see this with us pummeling UPS and FedEx with all of our Amazon Prime deliveries. And so, and then all that's kind of wrapped into this whole data economy, where the mass monetization of information is absolutely vital to our businesses. And frankly, the way we measure companies is different now than it's ever been before. We don't measure, like we used to do in banking, assets under management. We don't do that with
Yeah.
companies like Facebook and Microsoft and Apple, et cetera. That's just not the source of value anymore. And so now it's shifting over into creating, another term that's used commonly with this a notion of a digital ecosystem as a platform business model. And so I think that's really the essence, is creating these digital ecosystems that are platform based, that's going to break down all of these silos that we see today. And hopefully, ideally, maybe we'll see this kind of utopian, everyone's going to play well together. Personally, I doubt that's going to happen, because until capitalism dies, competition is not going to die, which means everyone's going to be in it for themselves. However, I think that what this is going to do is it's going to help break down a lot of the kind of the traditional paradigms around having these central brokers controlling everything, handcuffing us, and when we can go direct, whether it be direct to a financial services provider, insurance company, etc. Um, so, in your mind, when you think about these digital ecosystems, what do you think are some of the key components of a digital ecosystem that's really going to make it, a digital ecosystem versus something else?
So we've seen several different types evolve over the years where, if you think of Contour, which is, a trade finance consortium that was born out of, the lab, the sandbox back in the early days of R3. And, a group of banks came together. We helped them set up an LLC and kind of spun out where they actually have ownership of it. We also work with like non-for-profit ones like Restream in the US, which is like a different model, or, B3I, which was a reinsurance consortium that started out as a group of reinsurers that had employees on secondment, working together. Then once they proved out, that actually the use case worked, went out and set up a proper, kind of ecosystem. Like the one thing that I've seen, make and break them is really the governance and the structure of it. And if all parties do not feel like their view and their input is represented, it's been very difficult for them to scale because I always feel like one controlling party at the table will always kind of be able to get access to the better commercial models or even their data. So they've been very kind of I've seen it be very like deconstructive for like that model. So I think governance is, critical. Also, time to market and use case and like, proof of value, like is another thing. These ecosystems want to be able to go back and showcase how this is transforming their current infrastructure and really driving results, as well as ultimately in the future creating new revenue lines. So really having a clear product roadmap and delivery timescale, like it in an agile way. I mean, I think that's critical in a lot of what people are focused on, as well as like, cloud based. We went from, I would say, back in 2016, a lot of the banks thought they were going to have on prem nodes, and that was the structure they wanted because it was their data. Where now we've seen a lot of that migrate way to, cloud based solutions, which is really interesting. And I think having a clear model of that, as well as interoperability between the different clouds, has been kind of key, and like working with that. So I think, governance, product roadmap, great management team also that has a vision and agile development are kind of the key ones.
No, I agree. And I think that I think you're spot on with the comment around the strategy and the governance is just vital. And one of the first things that you had mentioned, maybe deliberately or maybe not, is you said, "Hey, we had to form an LLC." It's like, whoa, 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 slow down for a second here. And what project have we worked in the past, from a technology perspective? Have we talked about forming a legal entity? I mean, in my career before kind of jumping into this digital ecosystem world, that's just not something you would do. That's already set up. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Or if it needs to be done, the lawyers are going to go figure that stuff out. But here, what we're doing is we're talking about rewiring the connections into a company. I got a vivid imagination, so I think of this big old switchboard from the 1950s, and all these different plugs that are supposed to go in these different places. And what we're doing is we're saying, hey, we're going to take that switchboard out, and we're going to put something else in. We're going to put the digital switchboard in that doesn't have any plugs anymore. Now it's going to manage itself. Like we've seen evolve in telco. And so we're re-engineering the B2B, B2C, B2E relationships of an organization, and that's material. It's affecting the fundamental strategy of how products and services are created and sold and monetized. So it's a much bigger deal, and it requires a lot more business acumen than technology acumen, in my opinion. Would you agree with that?
No, I 100% agree. And it's like if you think of what drove people to blockchain distributed ledgers was really decentralized, right? Where no one party kind of controlled all the data, where you had ecosystems that could control it in a trusted environment. That, as you said, like banks traditionally do not have that model. Like they're not built and set up to trust one another in like a trustless ecosystem because they've never had kind of that security and privacy of data aspect where all the different nodes on the ecosystem have to agree with information and current to date SHA-256 is unhackable, and so it makes a big difference. But as you said, like we have to set up new, not just new ecosystem, new business models for these entities to survive, which I don't think we ever kind of imagined we'd be helping set up like LLCs when we came out. But from our back in our consortium days, we had a lot of experience in it, and they kind of leaned on us, and we viewed it as an enabler, right? If it's going to get them faster, liver scaling, like let's help them and kind of put all effort in. And now they went out and had a successful Series A, so it's been a successful model.
Yeah, totally. And as you know, Ryan, I'm somewhat anal retentive, so of course I've got something to represent. I think what we're talking about here, as far as a model here. So what I think you've seen this before in the past. I think I've shown you this. Essentially, how we think about digital ecosystems from a framework perspective and all the key components. And maybe we can talk about this here together a little bit. But I think the first bit that you had mentioned around the governance and strategy, I think of a digital ecosystem is enveloped in this governing organization that's responsible for not only the creation and the definition of the principles, the mission, the vision, the legal information structure, the business model, and all that. But also, they're responsible for the ongoing carrying and feeding of that digital ecosystem. And depending on your business model, you may be, maybe one founder that's dictating all these rules. But in many of these digital ecosystems, it's more like a board of directors or a steering or advisory group that's elected through some means. And the conversation could get complicated real quick when we talk about those means. Yeah, I'm just noticing from your facial expressions, you're saying to yourself, yes, those very painful conversations about how we charge people and who gets decision rights and who doesn't get decision rights, because no one wants to be in you know the people that don't get to make the decisions. But I look at kind of this the ecosystems enveloped by this governing organization that's defining the rules of the road. They're the central decision authority for the ecosystem. But within that, there's really five other key components. There is, what is the participatory model? So many of these enterprise blockchains, they can't be permissionless. I mean, ideally in the future, maybe, at least in my opinion, uh, I don't think they really realistically can be, for a variety of different reasons, both technical and human, behavioral, social, economic, geopolitically based. Um, but I think a lot of this is permission still to some level. It's like the city of Tel Aviv. I talked to their chief architect, and all their lights are and city infrastructure. Most of it is run from a digital ecosystem enabled by blockchain. And I asked him the question of, well, how do you secure this? And he says, well, it's permissioned. Only the actors I want to go in can get in, and we've got such strong legal agreements in place that if they do bad things, one will know because it's all transparent. But two, they know that we'll come after them and we'll put them in jail. So they're not going to do it. And so I think there's going to be models where that participatory model has to be figured out. What is the definition of value exchange? What actors are producers? What are consumers? A whole lot of dimensions there. But also, another key part of this is, what are the capabilities that we're going to deliver? I mean, a lot of these ecosystems, I'm seeing these marketplaces, more of kind of app store concepts being developed as part of the digital ecosystem, where the ecosystem not only serves one purpose, but it serves a purpose of, hey, come and build apps in this digital ecosystem to make it evergreen and to expand that model. And then the other aspects are around value realization. How are we going to monetize this, or how is this going to significantly cost optimize what we do as a business? And sometimes these ecosystems will be a pure optimization play. Sometimes it'll be a risk and security play to be compliant, like similarly with the pharma network that we talked about last time, where a lot of this is driven by the regulation. Yes, it'll save them time and money and reduce fraud, but the primary driver was actually regulation to get them to improve. And then, the last two are kind of the governance structure itself and kind of the management model around that. And as you know, we've seen lots of those different things. Then one we kind of keep in the background that we don't talk a whole lot about, at least my experience, we don't talk directly about it too much, is the ecosystem operations. And this could be done by the LLC, this could be done by one of the representatives, or it could be outsourced to another party. And that's a set of complications that's important to understand, because they're the ones that are going to be onboarding, maybe offboarding. They're the ones that are going to be doing all the change management on the smart contracts, solution development, the day-to-day service level management, around trouble tickets and all that great stuff. And so that's kind of how I'm looking at this. Is that similar to how you look at it as well?
Yeah, first I want to thank you for the plug for Corda, since it's a permission network, saying that, it's kind of the way of the future, because we got a lot of, slack and heat in the market when we kind of went from the gossip network to, sharing information on a bilateral and multilateral basis. But, back in the early days of R3, we had what was called the Architect Working Group, which it was a consortium of large, corporates that, were taking what characteristics of a blockchain they wanted and, prioritizing security and privacy up there. and scalability and the throughput and the transactions, and like the gossip network just wasn't able to kind of handle that. So and also, as I said, like, show off the statistics is unhackable now, but Mike Hearn, who was our chief engineer, said, who knows with quantum computing and the way things are going, maybe that's not the case in the future. And if parties don't need the information, why would it be on their node? Why would it be in their network? So I definitely agree with, like, the permission aspect of it, as well as like the governance and regulatory pressures. We're actually seeing, because of what's going on and the crisis, and how, business cannot be done as usual. If you think of, trade finance right now, with like bills of lading where they need wet signatures. Can you imagine getting wet signatures right now? It's extremely different, but it's a legal requirement. It's a regulation that they have to have them. So it's forcing these industries to kind of rethink the way they do business and the way they operate on a day-to-day basis, and how they're going to, transform kind of, on the other side of this.
Yeah, I think until we uh, get to this more Star Trek, world of everyone's around the campfire singing "Kumbaya," I think then maybe the whole permissionless thing will work. But today, let's talk straight. I mean, I don't want to get into a political conversation, but let's just talk about the geopolitical realities that we live in. Countries are essentially retreating from these major cooperation agreements, whether it be Brexit, in the EU, the US, and kind of the rise of nationalism. You know, that doesn't help our situation when we talk about these digital ecosystems that are permissionless. There are hard rules that are in place that are out of our control from a technology perspective. And so, as a pragmatist, when I look at this problem, I say, well, the permission solutions are going to be here for a while, because we're not going to get rid of capitalism tomorrow, if we ever do. We're not going to get rid of easily, countries cooperating with each other and doing what's in their best interest, instead of doing the global good. We hear a lot of talk about that, but when it comes down to the actual laws and regulations, that's not necessarily the case. And so, until we get that structure, then yes, I would agree with all those folks that have those opinions. But until then, very practically, I don't think it's realistic. Um, Now, with that said, you know, people are probably listening and like, hey, this whole digital ecosystem thing sounds pretty darn cool. Maybe I should do that. Ryan, do you think that building a digital ecosystem, do you think that applies to every company on the planet, and every solution should be based on this? What do you think are the criteria? And if you don't think everything should be part of these ecosystems, then what is the criteria for saying this doesn't look or smell like an ecosystem?
Yeah, I think, your beginning point, like, should every, company look at building a digital ecosystem? Before you go do that, you should know what it actually takes to do that. Setting up the proper SLAs, the security, the business operation, who's going to run the business network, who's going to onboard, who's going to offboard, who's going to do all the legal documentations. Because I'll say, I did find it, kind of at the beginning of the journey when R3 was a consortium, we were doing, we did something like 250, POCs, and some of them were moving on to like phase two and phase three. But these big corporates didn't want to be technology providers, right? That's not kind of their core. That's not, what their businesses are good at. So, I think there's a place for everything, but I think going into it being very educated. I know you've done a ton of work, you have a ton of frameworks out there on like what it actually takes to set up these digital ecosystems, as well as others in the World Economic Forum. And, I think kind of doing your homework and analyzing it before you go in, and also the duration. And, you could have agile sprints, you could have a killer app out there, and that's, could scale, but then setting up that network is a completely different animal. And understanding the risks, the pros and cons before going out there, I encourage, well, there's some other ecosystems out there that people can plug into. There's like templates like you guys have, like the framework, and, to kind of speed it up. So I would just say, make sure you do your due diligence before jumping in.
Yeah, and you had mentioned the World Economic Forum. I think they've got some really, really interesting models. Really like their. It's specific to blockchain, but it applies to digital ecosystems. Um, they've got a value framework, and I think that's a very useful tool, and I've used it in the past with clients to articulate based on the current capabilities of your business and what you're trying to accomplish and your short and long term strategy. Let's pin that to this value model of a digital ecosystem and say, hey, are there capabilities that this digital ecosystem that could provide that either help you leapfrog from a evolution perspective in your company, or maybe addresses something now. And so using those types of models I think are really important. And there's no right and wrong. Everyone's got some sort of frame on how to think about this. uh, when I look out in the industry, I think of a few. I think a lot of the standards bodies are doing a pretty good job, especially WEF. They're doing, because they're actually not only providing guidance, but they're actually running, some of these consortiums as well, which is, stress testing their logic on a lot of this stuff. So, I agree. It really depends on what are the capabilities are you trying to define. And again, it's a business question. It's, what are we trying to do? How aggressive do we want to be in the market? What's our philosophy on openness and inclusiveness in the marketplace? And that's going to determine kind of, what solutions you're going to go.
No, I definitely agree. And there's no need to kind of recreate the wheel out there. As you said, like there's tons of templates and tools out there. We've done work, you guys have done work. It's just I encourage you utilizing those instead of going out on your own.